Now, as we consider this whole question of how do we make our school systems and our classrooms future fit to ensure that we're building students who are future fit as well, one of the most important things we need to embrace as educators is a paradigm shift from focusing on content delivery to capability building. Now, you might think, well, even the content delivery mode we've been using for over a century has built capability, and it has, but the question is, are they the sort of capabilities that will set students up for the world of tomorrow? And I would suggest in many cases it's not. I mean, you look at a 20th century model of education, typically it built three brilliant capabilities that served us well in decades past. These were capabilities like you had to learn how to write fast, you had to listen hard and remember well. And those were all important skills in a bygone era. The question then becomes, what are the skills, the capabilities that will be required in the years ahead? Now, if you look at some of the work from people at the OECD or those involved with the 21st Century Skills Framework or the Institute for Habits of Mind, this is a bit of a summation, a list of the sort of skills or capabilities they would suggest that students will need in the years ahead. The question then becomes, how do we as a school system and as educators make sure we're building these capabilities? And I want to suggest there are three keys to doing just this. Number one, we're going to have to rethink our role as educators. Now, historically, if we're really honest, the 20th century model of education was the teacher was the source of information. Yeah, they were the fountain of knowledge. And the assumption was the students were the empty vessels that the teacher needed to fill. And that was once a model that was necessary and appropriate and also very efficient. It was a very efficient way of getting content through that teacher as the source of knowledge role. And yet, can I suggest, if we're going to build capabilities around critical thinking, metacognition, those sort of skills will only come by us adopting a facilitator role as educators, not the fountain role. Again, whereas the fountains have all the right answers, facilitators focus on asking all the right questions. If you can get good at asking questions of students and make them think and reason and evaluate, not only will the learning be far more meaningful to them, but they're learning skills along the way that will set them up for the world ahead. So the first key is we've got to rethink our role from being the sage on the stage to, I guess, that the guide on the side, but it's more than just that passive guide on the side role. It's being a facilitator and asking questions that are intentional and purposeful and build skills. The second thing we need to do is rethink the classroom. I mean, historically, the classroom was an environment that facilitated that knowledge transfer. So anything that got in the way of knowledge transfer from the teacher to the student, we tried to minimize or get rid of. So we designed classrooms where the windows were placed just high enough so the students couldn't see out. They wouldn't get distracted by things outside the classroom. We banned technology because we wanted the teacher to be the source of information, not have students checking on their phones whether what the teacher said was correct or not. And yet this whole approach to how we made classrooms function needs to shift, if for no other reason than that there is so much good quality stuff outside the classroom that we'd be mad not to bring into the classroom. I mean, a student today with a smartphone has more information a few taps away than entire national public libraries did 50 years ago. We'd be crazy not to realize that our job as teachers is to teach students how to use that information rather than trying to hold the tide at bay and keep it outside our classrooms. And so therefore, the whole focus of what a classroom is for needs to shift. And probably the most sensible approach that I've seen in recent years traveling around the world working with educators is this whole notion of a flipped classroom. Now, the flipped classroom is a concept that is deceptively simple. The idea is the key learning, the heavy lifting learning-wise happens outside the classroom through videos, through reading material, and then you come into the classroom and class time is spent debating, teasing ideas out, making the learning go from being something they've just taken on board mentally to actually understanding viscerally or develop their own opinion around. And so the classroom becomes a very different focus. It's not about delivering content, but helping students derive meaning for the content they've already taken on board. This also means we need to rethink the way our classrooms are structured, the very design, the layout of classrooms. Some of the most inventive and brilliant designs for classrooms right now are very open plan. In fact, you look at some examples of schools around the world that are doing brilliant stuff when it comes to designing classrooms with glass walls. We have multimodal facilities, 2 classrooms from 2 different disciplines in the classroom at once, and the teachers share content and ideas and resources, and the whole focus of that classroom is very, very different. We need to fundamentally rethink the way our classrooms work. Because if you look at a classroom today, in most cases, it looks exactly like a classroom 80 years ago. The third thing we need to do is we need to rethink our goals of learning. How do we know when a student has learned? And what's our measure of success as teachers? Now, if we're really candid, in many cases we've had a convergent model. We know if we've done our job if the student gives the right answer. If they've taken the information on board, they regurgitate it in an essay or an exam, we know they got the answer right, tick, rule off, move on to the next unit of learning. And yet this very convergent model is at odds with the very creativity we need to be fostering in students. Heard a great insight from a teacher over in Arkansas who said, we do not need schools that train students to memorize the names of the planets. We need schools that teach students to find new planets. I love that whole approach. It's a shift in what we use as our yardstick, our measuring stick for whether we've been effective or not. So if we're going to build capabilities, the sort of things that will set students up for the future, we need to rethink our role, we need to rethink our classrooms, and we need to rethink the goal of learning. This is going to be confronting. This will be uncomfortable. Most of us like to teach the way we were taught. And so what we're talking about here are things that are remarkably different to the classrooms we went through as students. And yet the world is changing far more rapidly than most of us would like. If we're going to be future fit and create students who are future fit, we need to adapt and change ourselves.